the next section, dealing with the reporting entity. And then Linda, Kelly, and John, so we're all going to take turns going through various sections, and that'll take us up until lunchtime. So, Linda, it's all yours.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, first test is, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just moved it down because it was super loud. So that'll wake you up, that along with the coffee, and you're going to need it because I'm going to talk about the reporting entity. Just with the show of hands, who has heard the term, the two words component unit before today? Raise your hand. So about half of you, that's great. I'm going to get into quite a bit of detail with this topic. Joe gave you a high overview. I'm going to talk about it in detail, starting with reporting entity and what does that mean. And what that means is all of the information that you have to incorporate into your financial statements. It includes you and the organization you represent. In addition to that, what we call component units. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. First concept you need to understand is what is a primary government. So the GASB made this a little easier for us. They carved out certain entities, and they said these entities are always primary governments. You don't have to go through the rigmarole of determining if you're a primary government or not, if you are a state, a county, or a city. So if you're a state, a county, or a city, you are a primary government by default. If you're not, you're a special purpose government, and you may also be a primary government. So that's where we have to get into the flow chart and understanding the requirements to determine if you are a primary government, not by default, but through going through the rules. So, what makes something that's a special purpose government, so not a state, not a city, not a village, not a county, what makes them a primary government? First of all, you have to have a separate legal stance. So you are legally separate all on your own. You stand on your own legally. You can be sued in your own name without recourse to another government. That's one of the big tests. Second, you have a separately elected governing body through popular election. So people go to vote for you. Your population goes to vote for you. The citizens of where you live vote for you. Fiscally independent of another government. And we'll go through that in detail. But this means you do not rely on some other level of government to adopt your budget, to levy taxes or set fees, or to issue debt. So in Indiana, it's our understanding, besides states, counties, and cities, that the schools meet the criteria listed above and would also be primary governments. And there might be other entities throughout the state that also meet those rules and will qualify as a primary government. So if you're a primary government, you have the job of determining your entire reporting entity of saying, okay, we're the primary government, do we have any component units? So are there other organizations? They could be other governments, they could be not-for-profit entities, or they could be corporations. Are there other entities that we're associated with, either through board appointments, or through financial relationships or other relationships? Are those kind of entities that we need to pull into our financial statements? So we're going to go through those rules, and it's really complicated. It's complicated in three ways. It's complicated to understand everything GASB has put forth. That's number one. Once you have that, it's complicated to go through your own activities, your history, what you have going on, to even get that short list of entities you have to analyze to see if they need to be incorporated, right? And then third, it changes every year, so you have to stay on top of it, or potentially could change every year. So it's not a one-time thing. So it's particularly difficult for all of you because this emanates from GASB Statement 14. Statement 14 is from a really long time ago. So most entities that do GAAP-based financial statements have been doing this for 15, 20 years, right? So they just have to maintain it every year. You have to recreate the wheel. You have to start from ground zero and build it up. So let's talk about the definition of a component unit. Number one thing, a component unit has to be a legally separate entity. Legally separate from you. If they're not legally separate from you, they are part of your primary government, they are part of you. They're a fund, or they're a portion of a fund, maybe a department within your general fund. So that's the number one thing. If they're not legally separate, you don't have to go through the rest, you have to report them. They're part of you. So when we talk about the rest of this, so let's say we determine an organization we're looking at is legally separate. I want you to think about implementing this and looking at component units from a financial reporting tree that has two main branches. On the right, our component units we're going to pull in because we are financially accountable for them. So we'll go through that, what that means. On the other side, our component units we're going to report because although we're not financially accountable for them, it would be misleading to exclude them from our financial statements. Different rules for my right arm than my left arm. You always start with the right arm. You work your way through that. If it falls out and it doesn't have to be reported under these rules, next you look at the left arm from misleading to exclude. It's a long process. So your number one thing you do is come up with a list of organizations that you think you're going to have to assess to determine if they're a component unit. And I would say the first list you come up with are the organizations that we appoint their board members. So it could be a few, it could be a lot. It depends on the entity. So looking at our right arm, who are we financially accountable to? Now we have three branches off of that arm that we're going to look at. Left arm misleading to exclude, we're going to have two more branches off that arm. So we'll go through that. So when we're talking about the right arm, we're financially accountable. I said we have two branches. We have board appointments, and then we also have, we talked about this a little bit, fiscal dependence. So back to the previous slide, we're talking about fiscal independence is what a primary government has. They adopt their own budget without approval by another governmental entity, they levy their own taxes, they issue their own debt. So we said if we don't meet this test, we can't be a primary government. But we might be a component unit. Right? So let's give an example. Let's start with a county. And let's say the county has a 911 center that it participates with. And that 911 center is legally separate. And the 911 center's budget has to be approved by the county. And the county can go in there, they can modify the budget, or they can reject it altogether and say, do it over, start again. So they have substantive approval over that budget. So that's what we're talking about being fiscally dependent. The 911 center is fiscally dependent on the county because there's a requirement through law, enabling legislation, something like that, that says, hey, 911 center, you have to get your budget approved by the county. Similarly, for the other three, does some other governmental entity have to approve your tax levy or levy your taxes for you on your behalf? Same with issuing debt. Does another governmental entity have to approve your debt before you issue it, or do they issue it for you? And then rates and charges. Because not every entity issues debt or levies a tax. Especially like an enterprise activity, like a water utility. Sometimes they're self-supporting through user fees. So a 911 center sometimes is like that. They charge all the communities that use the center a fee to participate and answer the 911 calls. And so they're never going to issue debt, and they're never going to levy a tax. They're self-supported through the fees. So in that example, if the county has to approve the fees that they're setting, they would be fiscally dependent on the county. Now, I think one thing that's tricky with this is a lot of governments say, well, we can't issue that and we can't issue a tax levy on our own because we don't have statutory authority to do that. Therefore, we're fiscally dependent. But there's two parts to fiscal dependency. And the part you got to remember is there another level of government that needs to approve? So if you never do it and it's not in your charter to do it, there's not going to be another government named as having to approve it for you. It just doesn't apply. It's not applicable. So look at all the ones that are applicable, and then look to see if you're fiscally dependent on another government. A primary government is never a component unit of another government, but a special purpose government very well could be. Any questions with that so far? We're still on that right arm, fiscal dependency. And remember, there's two branches. We have the, are you fiscally dependent on another government? There's a second test. So let's say we are. Let's use our 911 center. Let's say the county has to approve their budget. There's a second test that has to be met before we call them a component unit through the financial accountability branch. And that is whether or not there's either a financial benefit or a financial burden relationship between the 911 center and the county. So what's a financial benefit? That's where the county is legally entitled to the assets or has an ability to assess the assets of the 911 center. So PCU stands for potential component unit, because we're still analyzing. And the 911 center is the potential component unit in this example. The PG is the primary government, and in my example, that's the county. So can the county, do they get access to those assets or control the assets? And when you look to this, carve out those exchange transactions. So let's say the county provides water services to the 911 center. So they pump the water to the center, they send them a bill each month, the bill is paid. That's an exchange transaction. They are directly paying the county for their use of water, which is measured, right? So we're not going to say there's a benefit to the county from the 911 center based on those water sales. But as another example, let's say that the county gives them a charge in lieu of taxes. They call it like overhead. That there's no direct. There's no water bill. This is just, hey, we're going to charge you, $1,000 a month because we help you in various ways. We're not specific. That would be a benefit, albeit a small one, but that would be a benefit that you would have to assess. More often, there's a burden relationship. So, in a burden relationship, the primary government, the county, would have a legal obligation to provide financial support to the 911 center or take some kind of responsibility for their debt. And that happens quite a bit. You'll see a transfer of funds each year from a primary government to a component unit, significant support. So those are things you really got to watch out for. So let's talk about board appointments. So still in that right arm, financial accountability. There's two ways you could become a component unit through financial accountability. We talked about what fiscal independence and there's that benefit burden relationship. If you have both of those, you have a component unit. Congratulations. It means not only are you responsible for getting all your own stuff together for your financial statements, you have to deal with your component unit and get their information incorporated as well. The other one, though, and this is also pretty common, is through these board appointments. So we're going to talk about this. First of all, I'd like to say voting majority of the governing board. So when you're gathering your list of potential component units that you're going to assess, you have to understand a couple things. First of all, what board appointments do we make? How often do we make them? Because remember, some of these board appointments are staggered, right? This year we're going to appoint 2 people for a 2-year term. Next year, 2 people to a 2-year term. So we probably have 4 people in place in any given year. So you're not talking about how many appointments you made this year. You're saying at that organization, how many people on their board are our appointees. You also have to understand what's the voting majority for that entity. So how many votes of that board do they need a yay in order for something to pass? So if they have 5 people on the board and it takes 3 yeses for something to pass, 3/5 is your voting majority. appoint 2 people, you have not appointed a voting majority. If you appoint 3 or 4 or 5, you do. Does that make sense? So you have to understand. And it's not always equivalent or, not equivalent, but it's not always the same from entity to entity. You might have to call them up. Some people have great websites and you can figure it out there. Sometimes you just have to pick up the phone and say, how does your board work? So another test is imposition of will. So if we appoint a voting majority, so if the county appoints 3 out of 5 board members of the 911 center, we've met the first test. So we're going to look to the benefit or burden relationship as a second. If we have that, we have a component unit. And we're not going to go through benefit burden again. It's the exact same thing we just went through. But if we don't have benefit burden, then we say, do we have imposition of will? If you do have benefit burden, you don't have to worry or consider or go through imposition of will. So start with that benefit burden first. But if you don't meet that test, if you don't have that, you still have one more test. Can we impose our will on the organization? And all of these items are listed by the PSB as examples. And they are very clear that these are examples. It's not supposed to be an all-inclusive list. Every government is unique. Imposition of will, it's like you kind of know it when you see it, right? But these are the more common things. Can we remove board members? It's not written here. You might want to write it in your notes. Can we remove their board members at will? So we're not talking about removal for cause. Can if we don't like them as a person, can we remove them from the board? For no good reason. The answer is yes. Then you can impose your will. Can we modify or approve their budget? Modify or approve their rates or fees charges? Do these look familiar? Those are those fiscal dependency tests. So we're seeing them again here for imposition of will. Because right, if you control your budget, their budget, you control everything. I'm being a little dramatic, but you control a lot when you control the money. Ability to override or veto decisions that their board makes is imposition of will. Can you hire or fire their senior management? So their executive director, their superintendent, whatever those positions are. If you can hire those people or fire them, you can impose your will. Anything else that is similar to those? So we've talked about that right branch. By the way, if the answer is yes, we appoint a voting majority, that's this majority in the center, or we can impose our will because maybe we can approve their budget. We have a component unit. So 2 we've talked about, just to kind of recap, because this is complicated. There's a lot of branches. I only have 2 hours. Imposition of will, along with appointment of that 3/5 majority of the board component unit. Fiscal dependency with benefit burden, component unit. Appointment of that 3/5 board, along with benefit burden, component unit. So we have 3 things going on the right. So now we're going to talk about that left arm. So let's say we've gone through all of this with the 911 center, we've concluded no, we don't appoint a voting majority of their board. And no, they are not fiscally dependent on us. They can adopt their own budget. We don't intercede at all in that process. Yes, please.
Okay, so if you have a subordinate unit that you identify, as meeting these criteria, so yes, they're part of you and that. What if you share that unit, you share that entity with another unit? For our example, I'm glad you used 911. We share a 911 unit with our largest city, which is the majority of our county. In that relationship, we built a building. We have taken our 911 people, that was their 911 people. We give them tax money, let them on those. So, however, would both the large city have to report it and the county have to report it on their GAAP reporting?
Only one of you should report it. Right, only one. So I would guess, and your situation might be tricky because of this combined reporting, but does one or the other appoint that voting majority? Is that the county board making those appointments, or is that the city?
So we want to see first, would we both have reported
So yeah, and that's what, this is really difficult. It gets tricky.
I'm not sure if everybody heard the question too.
All right, so her question was, in her situation, they have a county and a city that really both manage the operations and the functions and responsibilities of the 911 center, and would they both have reported as a component unit? And the GASB rule is that only one primary government is going to report that entity as a component unit. You're only a component unit of one primary government, never two. And it gets tricky, and there might be some fighting back and forth, but if you're incorporating particularly based on appointment of the voting majority of the board, you're only talking about your own board. So if you represent the county, how many does the county itself elect, or appoint to that board? You're not going to say how much do we, along with the city, appoint to the board, just the county. And then the city would do the same thing. Misleading to exclude. So we've gone through all the assessment of financial accountability. We determined we don't have financial accountability for the 911 center. Now we have to take a step back and say, okay, but would it be misleading to exclude the 911 center from our financial statements because of the nature and significance of the relationship? And there are some things that you're really supposed to look to in making that determination. And I'll go through a few of them later on, but some of the things that you need to look at. So I talked about misleading to exclude also it has one arm but two branches. And the two branches represent tax-exempt organizations is one branch, and the other branch is everything else. So if you are dealing with a tax-exempt organization, and the best example and the most common component units that are included under misleading to exclude in this branch are foundations or other fundraising type entities associated with primary government. So colleges and universities have a lot of these, right? They have foundations to raise money and support the college. Libraries, sometimes they'll have a little not-for-profit called Friends of the Library, and they'll raise money and donate it to the library. Recreation centers, things like that. So if you have a tax-exempt entity that meets these three bullets, they provide their services nearly exclusively. So they're not raising money and giving it to 5 organizations. They're raising money and giving it to you and only to you. Once you get it in a second, they're giving it to the county and the city. It doesn't meet this test. Might still be misleading to exclude, but not under this test. Access to the resources. The primary government, county by example, can access the resources, or there's a pattern or a history of all those resources going to the county. That's what that's talking about, even if maybe in a single year you didn't get anything because fundraising was bad or whatever the reason. If that's the history and the pattern, then you would answer yes. Last one, significant. Are those resources significant to the county? Significant. We're not saying material. Material is a higher bar than significant. Significant requires a lot of judgment. What would the users of your financial statements feel about it? Would they think that's a lot? Or would they think the nature and significance is important? So there's no magic number. You have to use judgment.
Is there a percentage of your total budget maybe that would be 1%, 2%? I'm thinking schools, foundations,
So the question was, is there a percentage of the budget, or if you're talking about like a metric or a guideline, the answer is no. As is its nature, the GASB doesn't like to always get into the details and weeds, which auditors prefer, because it's easier to audit. Hey, 5% or more, you're supposed to include it, and you didn't, or you did, and we like that. A lot of judgment is involved. I would recommend that if you're going through this first year, maybe come up with your own metrics and guidelines, establish a policy, and say, we understand these are the users of our financial statements. These are the things we believe are important. These are the percentages we believe they would find significant. So this is how we made our determination. This was our judgment process. Then you can give that to your auditors. And they may not fully agree. They've used 5% and they thought it should be 3%, so that's a conversation you can have. But at least you have a control in place, right? And you've documented your thought process. So, yeah, it's really up to you what you use.
See how a linkage could be established too, because say if it has the first criteria such as your parks board, your commissioners appoint the parks board. But then your parks board pick the people who are going to run the parks foundation. So I mean, some of it can fall in those categories, but the other fall in the first category, that are inclusive.
Right, and what you're talking about is also fairly common. So her question was, or your comment was, sometimes, you appoint the board of an organization, and then the board of that organization appoints the board of another organization, right? Do I have this correct?
Yes.
And that does happen frequently. And we'll get into this a little later, but once you determine your component unit and you're going to incorporate their information, their financial statements into your report, you're going to incorporate their financial statements, which include them and their component units. So it ends up in your report, but not because they're your component unit, but it's because it's your component unit. So it's not your child, it's your grandchild. Probably a bad analogy, child and grandchild, but it kind of makes sense, right?
But if you search, you see your opposing will, it just takes, and I'm a grandma, I'm really good.
Right, sometimes imposition of will goes all the way down to the grandchildren. Usually it's the benefit, out of the benefit burden that goes to the grandkids. But when we have a component unit that's a tax-exempt organization and it meets these 3 tests, they're definitely a component unit. They are always discreetly presented. They're never blanked. All other component units other than these, we have an assessment to make further. We take our component units, these all met the test in one way or another. We're going to incorporate our financial statements. Some get blended, some are discreetly presented. You don't have to make that assessment for these tax-exempt organizations that meet these other 3 tests. They're always discreetly presented. And what that means is they stand apart from the primary government. Separate column, you can tell they're separate from you. They're not mixed in, they're not consolidated. Okay, so let's talk about that, the blended versus the discreetly presented. And blended means, is anybody here from a sole purpose enterprise fund? So a college, a university, or transportation agency that just does one service and it's considered, an enterprise fund or a business type activity? I'm guessing not, because I think most of you are counties, cities, schools, right? I can tell by the color of your, whatever these things are called. Okay, so I won't get into that. But if you are incorporating through a blended presentation, a component unit, that means there are going to be a single or multiple funds along with your own funds in your financial statements. So a user external to your entity that doesn't really understand all of these funds and what they are, they're not going to know your funds from your component unit's funds unless you put it in the funding. So let's say our county incorporates that 911 center. That 911 center has a general fund, a special revenue fund, and a capital projects fund. Along with, you're going to have your general fund. That's going to always be the same. But your 911 center has its own general fund and a special revenue fund. Both of those are going to be reported as 2 separate special revenue funds, unless you decide to consolidate them, in your special revenue fund section. So you're going to have all your own special revenue funds, and then these 2 for the 911 center. Same thing with the capital projects fund. You have your own, and you'll have theirs. And maybe you put 911 center capital projects fund in the title, so it's at least clear to you what that is. So that's what blending means. It's just part of your financial statements. It's not off to the side separate. If somebody wants to figure out what's yours from theirs, you're going to have to get out your calculator, right? Take the total and subtract their stuff, because it's not going to be obvious. A lot of governments don't like to blend, because they don't, even though they've got all those tests, they don't feel responsible for their information. They don't like the fact that it's commingled in with their own information. It's a little unnerving, right? That you're taking responsibility for their stuff to this extent. So most people prefer discreetly presented. That's where it goes only in your government-wide financial statements. It goes in your government-wide, it's called a balance sheet, but it's called a statement of deposition. And it goes in your government-wide income statement, which is called a statement of activities. So you have your primary government information, a little space on the paper, then your discretely presented component unit or component units. You might have more than one. And then the same thing with the income statement. You don't have to put their cash flow in there. You might have fiduciary fund component units. I suspect there probably aren't too many of those, so I won't overwhelm you with information. And that's usually the preferred. You don't have a choice though. If it meets the criteria for blending, which are these, I guess I didn't go through those, but if you meet the criteria for blending, you must blend. You can't say, I don't like that, I'm going to discreetly present. You're stuck with blending. So you have to blend when your board and their board are the same. So the tricky thing to this one, your board and their board are substantially the same. So that 3/5 board situation. We appoint, let's say instead of appointing 3 board members, 3 of our board members serve on their board, and they have 5 members total, right? 3/5. Well, let's say the county board is 10 people. They have 5, you have 10. 3 of their 5 are your people. Those boards are not the same. Your board is double the size of theirs. If the county board was 10 and theirs was 9, and you had all 9 positions, you would say those boards are substantially the same. But when you start getting more than 1, 2, 3 people different in total board members, they're not the same. Does that make sense? So very important to understand the makeup of the board and that potential component unit or component unit that you're assessing. If they're substantially the same, then you go and look and say, so we have that financial benefit burden relationship. Definition of benefit burden is the same here. It's in multiple places in the statement. So we have the same board and we have a burden because we fund them. We give them a transfer of money every year. We have the same board, and maybe we don't have benefit burden, but we have operational responsibility. So we keep their books and records. They follow our procurement policy. You know, we pay their bills and they reimburse us. Then that would also meet the test for blending. They exclusively serve you. So the 911 center has no other customers, they only serve the county. That's what that means. If you have a not-for-profit component unit, so let's say the 911 center is a not-for-profit 501c3 or something like that, and the county is the sole corporate member, it's in their charter, it's in their incorporating documents, then you have to blend it. And last of all, the total debt of the E911 center, the primary government is responsible for that. So the word debt here is tricky because people think, oh, GO debt, general obligation or revenue bonds. No, this is talking leases, mortgages, total debt, all of that stuff. So if you're responsible for repaying your bonds, but they have to pay their own mortgage and they, have leasing arrangements or whatever, that's not total. So this does not include you're partially responsible for some of the debt. As far as note disclosures, we do have less reporting for the discreetly presented because it's only in those government-wide statements and potentially a fiduciary fund. But we do have to incorporate their footnote disclosures in with ours in our report. Most people put it in a separate section labeled discreetly presented component units because they want it clear that hey, those aren't our capital assets, they belong to them. But you do have to incorporate anything that you feel is significant and necessary for a full understanding of your financial statements, including your discreetly presented component units. So like a 911 center is all about providing service. They have operators. They probably have very few capital assets. You might decide that capital assets aren't really that significant to a 911 center or to understanding your financial statements. You might choose to exclude the footnote on capital assets. But maybe something else they do is extremely important. You would incorporate that footnote. So you do have a lot of judgment. And judgment isn't always fun, because you have to make decisions, right? And then there might be an auditor or somebody else that questions your decision. So again, this first year, make a few notes of why you made the decision you did, and what to include and what to exclude, and why. And I think probably most people will appreciate you did that, and agree with you to a large extent. Last of all, fiscal year end. Your component unit might not have the same year end as you. So if you have a June 30th year end and your component unit has a December 31st year end, the rule is that you use the year end that occurs within your reporting period. So let's say you're reporting June 30th, 2018. You incorporate December 31st, 2017 for your component unit. Don't get crazy about labeling things December 31st in your footnotes. Just put it once that the component unit's year end is December 31st. You know it's different from the county, but then you don't have to label everything December after that. But you do have an option. If their year end occurs after yours, but within the first 3 months, you can incorporate that more recent year. My advice to you is don't do it. And the reason is, now you're held hostage waiting for them to issue their audited financial statements before you can pull them in your report. Do you really want to have to wait to get those statements from your component unit and finish your own? It can get tricky. Transactions, if you blend, you just have to make it, it's a consolidation. Make sure you eliminate those transactions. So if you give them money every year, they'll have a revenue, you'll have an expense, you have to eliminate those for the total column. There's a flow chart in the GASB statement, and you probably can't see it up here, but it's really useful. It takes you through the 2 branches and the decision tree and all the things you have to think about and decide on. What I do when I'm doing an audit and somebody has identified a new component unit, I get it out myself. I take my yellow highlighter and I go through the arrows and I highlight, okay, this one's yes, I go to here, and the answer is no, I go here, and I retain that in the work papers as support for concluding that I came to the same conclusion they did, or maybe we disagreed, and we meet and we go through the flow chart together. So it's very, very useful. Are you aware that you can get all the GASB statements for free on the GASB's website, gasb.org? So don't ever pay for a GASB statement for publication. Just go online and print it off, including these things like the flowcharts and other useful tools. So if you pull in questions, then you are done with me. I'm done with this topic for the most part. True or false? Following are indicators of a primary government's ability to impose its will on a potential component unit. Ability to remove board members, ability to modify or approve the budget, ability to modify or approve their rates or fees charges, override or veto decisions of the board, hire or fire people. So anybody that thinks that's false? You're right, it's true. Discreetly true or false, discreetly present a component unit with its own financial statement report does not need to be recorded within the footnotes of the primary government. That's false. So again, you have a little bit of judgment and leeway as to which of their notes to report, but you do have to pull in their footnotes. Including things like subsequent events. They're significant. True or false, all component units must report as the same fiscal year end as the primary government. That's false. You don't have to try to take your statements and update them to your year end. You take what they have and you go with it. And I believe, is that it for me? Yeah. That's it. I'm going to turn this over to Kelly. Unless you have more questions.
I have a question. Before we start with Kelly, because I encountered this a number of times, when the component unit has transactions with the primary government, and we bring them in with a different year end, those transactions may or may not eliminate? How does that?
So if you have a difference, so let's say the December and June year ends, and there was a transfer of funds from one. So let's say first year you transfer $1 million, second year you transfer $1.5 million. So So your statements are gonna show in year 2 that you transferred $1.5 million. Well, we're pulling in from their statements half of year 1 and half of year 2. And maybe it's, $1,250,000. You just explain it in the footnotes why those transfers don't eliminate. And then you just report, kind of what the amounts are in the 2 statements, what was not eliminated, and why. You just explain it in your footnotes.
With different year ends,
That
it's
does happen.
okay not to eliminate. as long
It's
as
okay for there to be a balance because the elimination is not complete because of the differing year ends and the different amounts being reported. So you eliminate what you can. So if one has $1.5 million, one has $1,250,000, $250,000 is going to be what remains. The difference between the 2. You eliminate what you can, and then you explain in the footnotes why there's $250,000 still there. And it's just because of the differing year ends. Okay?
Okay, thanks, and
Yeah.
that was